Welcome to what happened on Saturday with Marlon Kerner. Marlon, how you doing?
Josh, I'm doing well. I mean, I don't know how much Buffalo or how well Buffalo's doing right now
It's
after
it's been a
Monday,
rough
but
it's been a rough it's been
I'm
a
doing
rough
okay.
48. It's been a
It's been
rough
a rough
48
48. Yeah,
for
lots of
anybody who
news coming
loves
out of One Bills Drive, and
sure thing. And then
yeah,
even my beloved Sabres, who I'm wearing the sweatshirt in honor of today, your best player goes down with a week to week or month to month injury last night, and you get dog walked by one of your biggest rivals, the Bruins. So as always, like I told my new 11-year-old son who just had his birthday and he got tickets to go to the game Monday night as a birthday present, I said, welcome to growing up in Buffalo, when he got home at 12:45 in the morning with red eyes and frustration. So, before we get into, what happened on Saturday in the college landscape and then what happened last night, two quick questions for you. There is an early line on the SEC championship game, which is already locked in,
ooh,
of Alabama, Georgia. What do you think the line is, and what do you think the line should be?
that's a tough one, right? Because it could either be a 50 and a half over a like total score, and then I'm gonna say line three.
Georgia, yeah,
Georgia's probably
Georgia
favored by
minus
three.
three. Georgia,
Georgia
Georgia minus
three.
three. You nailed it. And then the total. I could find the total, but yeah, the total. There is no total yet. So,
Okay.
but it's
I would
Georgia.
say
It's Georgia
49
minus
and a
three.
half, 49 and a
Yeah,
half or
that's probably
higher has
right.
got to be that. Like, I could see that being a 27, 20, 29 game, 27, 28 game. Their defenses are playing pretty good. Georgia can definitely, their offense looked really good finally. They
Finally,
started looking like they got some guys back. Looks like they're completely healthy. So, yeah, I could see that. But Alabama is playing really good
I
football,
can't
and
wait to
their
talk a little bit
quarterback, that's going to be fun to watch.
about Alabama. My favorite bet going forward, and I convinced my buddy to also lay down some money with me. I have Alabama at 6.5 to 1 to win the national championship, and I have this. I like that those odds. And then also even the Georgia game. I think the Alabama quarterback might be the best player on the field if he's got everything working. So I their defense finally looked like old Alabama
Yep.
defense this week. And if their defense plays that well and Jalen Milroe, kind of has his shit together, I feel like he's probably the most talented player on any field he's on in college football. And I'll roll with 6.5 to 1 with Bama. The other thing I wanted to talk to you about is a coach getting fired. And it's not necessarily the coach you might think it would be around here, but you gotta talk to me about Jimbo Fisher and the
Oh my goodness.
multi-million-dollar buyout. Like, what's your take there, and what do you think the players? I know it's a different world from when you played, but man,
Yeah.
like if you're a player there, I mean, what? God, Lee, the guy got a $70 million, parting gift, and now your season and your college career is completely up in the air.
As a player, you always try to focus on the things that you can control, right? So when I look at that, like some of those guys came after, Jimbo recruited them. So they knew that he had a long-term deal. They knew that there was a lot of money tied into that. You don't go to a university thinking that, hey, the university is going to get rid of the coach. Like you're hoping that you're a part of a class that will help the coach and the staff that's there bring the honor, so to speak, in quote unquote air quotes, right, and help them win games. You just want to try to win and compete, get to the SEC championship. That's what you want to do. Those are the things that you're looking for. So you don't really worry yourself about the business of football sometimes because you don't. A lot of guys don't necessarily treat college football as a business. Like you think of it as this is the stepping stone for me to get to me getting to the NFL, where it is a business. It's all about the contracts, the dollars and cents, and things can happen. But in the back of your mind, coaches leave, coaches come and go. So those things happen. But when I think about it as a former player, the money is just astronomical about the buyout clause. That's why I didn't think they would pull the trigger this soon with all the money that they have, because you're going to have to hire another coach and he's going to look at them and say, okay, depending on what name you get, hey, I want something close to what Jimbo got.
Mm-hmm.
So you could be on the hook for paying over $150 million to two coaches. And so when you think about that dynamic, now they do have the money to do that. So it's
Sure.
not like
Yep.
they can't afford it. But when you think about that thing, that's when I go back and I think about players like, hey, when they go to the portal and they leave and they do and they make a business decision to kind of say, hey, I'm not getting enough playing time, or you keep bringing guys, you keep making promises and not delivering. I'm going to go elsewhere, kind of like LeBron, and I'm going to take my talents to South Beach. But that kind of evens the playing field. So when coaches play the old game, and Jimbo's been around for a long time, so he has a little bit of that old school coach where back in the day used to stockpile players and like, I'm a red shirt, I'm gonna do these things, and guys like, I want to play now. So I think it's kind of reticent of how we look now, right? Like it kind of shows you what this landscape is going to look like going forward, and it's going to continue to evolve, and it's going to continue to change, and you're going to get coaches that get really big contracts. But it's, to me, it's crazy. And as a player, when you get to with that situation, some guys are going to be like, we needed a change, right? Like if you're looking at it and you're a young guy, you don't really know Jimbo like that. Like if this is your first year, you're kind of getting used to him and his style. It's easier to kind of go to a new coach. If you're an older coach, you may have to make, or older player rather, you may have to make a decision on, do I go into the portal and go somewhere else? Do I fit? Because now you're going to have to ask yourself the question of, who do they hire? And does my skill set translate to the offensive scheme they want to run, or does it translate to the defensive scheme they want to now try to implement and try to run? And so now you can see the roster flip, kind of like when Dion went to Colorado and it's like, listen, these guys aren't good enough. I could see a coach coming in saying, this guy's not good enough, that guy's not good enough. I'm going to release you from your scholarship. You're free to go and play wherever you want to go. And so you could see a mass exodus, and guys are having that conversation already in their mind, like, depending on who they keep or who they bring in, I may have to consider making a change and going to a different university. And I think that's going to be the biggest change, because now the new coach is going to have to bring in his own guys, recruit. And so that's going to take a couple years before he gets guys into his system and gets them understanding what he wants to do on the field.
You could see why they might have gone first, because they've got so many high profile 4 and 5-star guys
Yes.
that if they're not the first ones to hire somebody new, man, that roster is just going to get poached. I'm
Yeah.
sure that there are already big time programs, your Buckeyes, my Irish, already looking at that roster thinking,
Well, how many
as soon
guys
as
want to
this,
go play for Dion, right? Like, if
right, of course.
as a defensive line, like he needs offensive lineman and
Yeah.
defensive lineman, and I'm not playing, I'm out. I'm going to
Yeah.
Colorado, and
Did you
he would
see
gladly take you.
Did you see the text? So Dion lost a recruit, DB, because now who knows what happened behind the scenes, but his stated reason was that he was concerned that Dion wasn't going to be in Colorado next year. Well, Coach Prime put out a tweet, Instagram post yesterday saying, my sons are here, my dog is here, my parents are here, I pay taxes here, my mail comes here, making the case that he's going to stick around in Colorado. Now, all of those things might be true, but it doesn't mean he's going to be paying taxes there 6 months from now, especially if
That's
a place
true.
like Texas A&M or there's rumors that Chip Kelly might be out at UCLA. Like somebody's going to offer, Dion a bag of money somewhere else. And I guess it's a question of whether he wants to stick around or not. As a former player, a guy like Jimbo Fisher, or, like when you were at Ohio State, your head coach, how much like interaction did you have with them, like on a day-to-day basis? I know as a captain, as a senior, it might have been quite a bit, but as an underclassman, like, did you really ever have any interaction with the head coach?
Yeah, I mean, the head coach is always around, always walking, talking, coaching, telling you to do things a specific way. So I talk to Coach Cooper all the time. I mean, you have more input and more direction from your position coach. So yeah, but head coaches will come around, that they know your name, like they do all the things. You're trying to build that bond with them, because he's going to be the guy to come back and say, hey, you're not playing well. I need you to pick up the pace. I need you to do certain things. Like, this is not why I recruited you. And if not, I'm going to have to go recruit somebody else. And so Coach Cooper was the one who had those conversations with guys. So we knew what he wanted, what he was about, what the expectations were. And then you had to deal with, I grew up in that, I'm old. So the early 90s, when coaches really could really just rail on you and say some things. And my coach was there, and he used some curse words that I didn't think was allowed to be said in the same combination. And like, what does that even mean? Like, what bull, what? Like,
Yeah.
and you're like, okay, what does that even mean? Like,
And you didn't have any
but
leverage back then, right?
no, you didn't have the leverage because he couldn't leave.
Now
There
you
was
could
no
just,
portal.
yeah, you had no leverage.
No leverage. Like, once you signed, that was it. And if you wanted to transfer, you had to sit out a year. So the coaches could really come in and sell you a pipe dream and say, you can come in and play as a freshman and contribute. And then, hey, I'm a red shirt you. I'm a change. and that's it. And you're there. And they didn't have to let you out of your scholarship. There was no hardship that you could say, hey, I want to go back home now. Some coaches were pretty responsive, like, hey, your mom's sick. I get it. I understand. Like, go ahead. But some coaches like, no, I'm not letting you go home to another powerhouse of a school and you're this recruit that I wanted. So no, you transfer, sit out a year, go do what you need to do, and then go back and go ahead and play. And that makes you wait another year. And so it was totally different. The landscape was different back then. So you saw guys really stick it out a little bit longer because they really had no choice.
It always amazes me how it seems like the general public will take the side, like if there's a player strike, they almost always take the side of the owners,
Right.
and in free agency, it's always like, oh, the player needs to do this, the player needs to do that. And in college football, especially, I'm so glad that the landscape just flipped at least a little bit towards the players, because you've seen so many examples the last 5, 10, 15 years of coaches bailing out on teams, famously Brian Kelly walking out before Notre Dame was even eliminated. And the guys just always, the coaches have no loyalty, their contracts literally mean nothing. And at least now there's you wouldn't be in a position where if a coach uses language with you or treats you so poorly, you're not stuck anymore. You can leave. And I guess that's just basic human dignity, I guess, is the way I view it. And I guess I'm glad, I'm glad that college football has evolved to that, where obviously a bunch of other people might not be, but I think that's only a positive.
Yeah, it's definitely a positive. I think, to your point, the landscape was just different when I was younger, and it was just different. The economics is different than what it is now, and so the players have a little bit more leverage when it comes to trying to even out the pie. Like the NIL really helped give players a little bit more leverage than what they had before. The NCAA had a very long time to really fix this problem, and I'm sure once the football season ends, we're probably going to take some in-depth conversations and do some interviews and bring people in and talk about behind the scenes of how it even evolved and got to this point. But the NCAA should be able to license your merchandise, your number, put you on Madden, and then do all these things, and they could benefit and capitalize off your name and your image and your likeness. And you really had no choice but to take it, because that's what you went to school. And so now, as TV deals and revenue has gone up, and states have passed NIL laws where guys can capitalize on it, thanks to the O'Bannon brothers and other people who filed suit, now it's kind of changed a little bit. And I'm glad that the players can handle that. But at some point in time, it's going to evolve again. So we're at the early stage of the Wild Wild West. There's a lot of money. But yeah, like I think about some of the things that I was called and some of the names I was called, some of the things that were said to me, some of the times that, like, hey, maybe I did waste a scholarship on you. Well, I don't even know why I brought you here. Like, if you make that mistake again, I'm going to ship you off to Baldwin Wallace, which was a Division III school.
Baldwin Wallace.
Wow, right. Like, you're like, what? Like, and that specific comment wasn't said to me, one of my teammates, but you're just like, and I've had players like, maybe I can't pick up this offense. Like, what are you, boy? You stupid. Like, kind of like the water boy. What are you, stupid? Like, and I'm like, but that's how coaches were able to talk to guys. It was like a mental, I'm gonna break you down mentally and then try to build you back up. I'm gonna tear down everything that is all of you and try to build you back up. And it's a different era. Like, you can't get away and talk to guys and think guys are going to buy into that in this day and age. And so, they're just too gifted athletically. They're bigger, they're stronger, they're faster, and there's more opportunity. So, with the NIL and the portal, guys can kind of like, you're not going to talk to me like that, right? And
it's like dating. It's like dating, right, Marlon? Now that there's like Tinder and Hinge and all that, like, people have options, and you can't.
What you know about Hinge? I don't know.
I know nothing about Hinge, Marlon. Don't get me in trouble now. I got some single friends, I got some single friends. So let's on that note, let's go take a look at the college football playoff rankings that came out last night. I didn't appreciate them sticking it in between the two college basketball games. We were planning on recording last night at 7:00 when they came out, and unfortunately, there's that Coaches Classic and the Duke Michigan State basketball game that ended up taking forever. Delayed the rankings. You texted me you wouldn't be surprised if Ohio State dropped again. Right. It really, the top 3-4 here don't really matter all that much. We're a week and a half away from the Ohio State Michigan showdown. But Georgia number 1, Michigan number 2, Ohio State number 3, Florida State 4.
Georgia 1, Ohio State
Ohio State
2,
too. I'm
Michigan 3.
sorry.
Don't be
You're right.
flipping. Don't be trying to flip
No, no,
that
no.
maize
You're
for
right. You're
Lula.
right. You're right.
No,
Again, it
no.
again doesn't matter. Fluid doesn't really matter. What was your take? I guess we'll start at the top. With Georgia, and like you said, their offense, that was their best and most complete
That
game
was
of the
their
year.
best game. Yeah. I
You
mean, it
know,
was a great game. They took it to Ole Miss. Like it was, they got their star tight end back. They got some other players back from injury, and they just hit on all cylinders. Like it just looked like a different team. They went out there, dropped 52. They scored 14 in the first quarter, 14. It's 28-14 at the half, and they just didn't look back. They just went on a roll, and all of a sudden you're like, okay, Ole Miss, who was ranked in the top 10 at the time, they were number 9. So that
yeah,
was a knock
yeah.
on Georgia, their strength of schedule, right? Like, okay, they're the defending national champions, and all of a sudden you're like, but they don't have the resume that Ohio State has. Well, they beat a top 10 team handily.
Two
And
two
so
things.
now there you
Yep,
go.
two things from that game. They got Blake Bowers back, and that obviously made a huge difference.
Yep.
And then him and Lad McConkey on the field at the same time. Those are two of the best, wideouts in college football.
Yes.
I had a question for you during that game. They always talk about Lane Kiffin and starting fast and the script. And this shows up in the NFL too. And I think a lot of people don't understand it. Maybe you could kind of break it down and explain it. The opening drives for a lot of teams end up looking very different than the rest of the game. And they always talk about in-game adjustments, and some coaches are really good at scripting. The old famous Mike Shanahan in his first 15 plays. Like, how come a lot of offenses will have success on the first and second drive of a game, like Ole Miss did, and then from there, it's almost like you see them hit a wall, and then for the rest of the game, it doesn't go the same way. I've been asked before, how come teams just don't go back to the script? Run the same 4 or 5 plays, to start the third quarter or whatever. And to me, it's a legitimate question. And I thought, maybe you'd be able to kind of talk people through that.
Honestly, it's more of it's kind of like you're trying to figure out how they're going to call the game, right? So what always ends up happening is the offense generally has the advantage because you're not sure as a defensive play caller how aggressive you want to be. So you try to become, for lack of a better term, you try to play vanilla, right? Like you don't try to blitz as much to give the big play, to really try to get, especially if you're on the road, you don't want to get the home crowd involved. So you're going to try to make sure you don't give it the big plays. And so that'll allow you to kind of be able to say, look, well, if they get in this coverage, we're going to do this. And so when you script the first 15 plays, you can add tempo, you can do some things because you know what you want to call. You expect a certain look and you expect a certain defense. And so what ends up happening is once you get to that first one, sometimes they'll go down the field and they're like, okay, they did this, they did that. We got them in cover 3. When they get in cover 3, we want to run this route, this combination. And then the defensive coordinator says, okay, well, when they get in this formation, they did this. And so there's always this little chess match, which is why, if you've been following the Michigan saga and why you get an unfair advantage when you know what the checks are going to be, this is why the chess match is why the scripted plays first happen and help the offenses, because sometimes you kind of can have a guess of what they're going to run on defense. But then when they change it up and they get in cover 2 or they bring a little bit of pressure, now it changes what you want to do. And then there's hot routes that have to happen and all these things that you have to do. So that's why the scripting of plays really kind of put the defense kind of on their heels a little bit, because they kind of want to figure out what you want to do, how you want to attack them. But once they figure it out, like Georgia's kind of like, okay, we got how you want to attack us now. We got what you want to do. We kind of figured that out. Chess move, check, here we go. And they made their own checks on defense. Like, here we go.
That's a really good way to put it. You're kind of declaring where you're attacking. You're declaring how you want to attack. And like you said, if you're a defense, you're going to probably play more base, more vanilla early until the offense declares. And then once the offense declares, then you make your adjustments, whatever else. And some coaches, like the Georgia staff, you felt like middle second quarter there, it was going to be a real challenge for Ole Miss to continue to move the ball.
Absolutely.
Like it was very obvious very quickly that Georgia had diagnosed what Ole Miss wanted to do, and Ole Miss just ran into a wall. And for the rest of that game, it seemed like you could give Ole Miss 20 possessions, and they weren't gonna, they were not gonna sustain drives, and they were not gonna score. They were out physicaled, and I was really hoping that it was going to be a competitive game and a track meet, and it was a track meet for Georgia, but not for Ole Miss.
Definitely. I mean, and that's the thing about when you think about how defenses really try to make you one-dimensional. If you can stop the run, if you can make them just get into passing situations the entire time, now I have the advantage because I can show you blitz looks. I can drop out of it. I can keep the blitz look on. and say, I hope your side adjust is there, and the quarterback and the receivers get on the same page and recognize it. And Georgia just really did a master class on making Ole Miss one dimensional. We know that Lane Kiffin really wants to have that passing game. He likes all those wrinkles. So once they got behind the sticks, like that's why we talk a lot about, and I know we hate the
Oh
term
no, here
complimentary
we go.
football, and I'm not going to throw the complimentary football to a point, but what you have to do is you have to sustain drives. This is where the complimentary part comes in for the offense and defense, right? Like if you can sustain drives, even if you're not scoring points as much, if you can just stay on the field and allow the defense to rest, you give them a fighting chance. Oh, Miss couldn't do that at times. And so, hey, 3 and out here, 5 and out here, bam, kick the ball off, Georgia scoring. And all of a sudden, you're like, okay, this is snowballing. And now you're like,
Yeah.
I'm tired. We just got back. We just got off the field, back on the field. And that's how Georgia was able to really to wear them down. Like, but defensively, they had a great scheme. Once that second quarter kind of hit, and then they adjusted at halftime, like they shut them out, complete
Yeah.
shutout in the third quarter. Like they didn't score any points, and all of a sudden you're like, it's 28-14. Now it's 38-14, and that was it.
They could have played for 8 quarters, and I don't think Ole Miss was going to score again. Like it was crazy. And the craziest part was you see the graphic on the screen of just how many first and second rounders Georgia's lost on defense to the NFL the last couple of years. It's unbelievable that not only is their defense still functioning, but it's still top 5 in the country. They've lost so many top 60 guys to the NFL. It's incredible. It seems like they've all gone to the Eagles, but it's unbelievable how many
line has gone to the Eagles.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Great players, play in the NFL from Georgia. Well, let's go to number 2. I'm sorry that we'll get to Michigan after your Ohio State Buckeyes. That was as dull. I know you're going to talk about how impressive they were and they did what they needed to do. From a more neutral point of view, that game was as dull of a quote unquote big time primetime game, for NBC to have it on night game in at Ohio, at Buckeye Stadium. Like, God, a Michigan State posed no threat, which isn't necessarily much of a surprise. And it was just, it just felt over after the first drive of the game.
Yeah. And what I wanted to see, and I think we talked about that briefly, was we wanted to see Ohio State start fast, right? If we look at the stats, right? Like Ohio State has historically all season started really slow. Like they didn't come out the gate and do anything, but finally they got up, and they got up early and quickly. Like it was 14-0 at the end of the first. And you're like, oh my gosh, like where'd this come from? And then they scored another 21 points in the second quarter to make it 35-0 or 35-3 at the half. And you're like, okay, this game's over. Like there's nothing that Michigan State could do. They didn't show that they could do anything on the offensive side, really to threaten Ohio State. The defense played well. And you mentioned Georgia and all the guys they lost. And I think we joked about it last Sunday when I was like, to think about CJ Stroud, like he could still be a Buckeye. And so I wish, when you think about those things, like all the talent that Ohio State had on their offensive side, and that was what was always missing, is just consistent quarterback play, getting the ball out fast to their receivers, letting their playmakers make plays. They finally did it against a depleted team, a team that didn't have all their guys, all the offensive firepower that you really needed to compete against Ohio State. So what I wanted to see Ohio State do, what they did was start fast, take control of the game, and then get younger guys in the second half, which they were able to do. So I'm glad they did that. I still thought they would drop and go to number 2. And just because of the way Georgia looked and Georgia played, but this sets up the showdown for 10 days in Ann Arbor. Like that's what you're setting up for. So 2 and 3, it doesn't really matter. One of those guys are going to one's going to stay 2, or one's going to go to 2, and one's going to drop to 5 or 6. That's how it's going to look, and maybe 7.
Yeah. This week, obviously, we'll talk about the upcoming game this week for both Ohio State and Michigan. On CJ Stroud, real quick, I go to my buddy Sammy's house, and we have 7 TVs that we watch the NFL on. And watching that live, he was so impressive in that game in Cincinnati. And then up 10, fourth quarter, he threw a gruesome interception on the 3rd down, where it really felt like all they needed to do was run the ball, punt. You're up 2 scores with like 4 minutes to go. It's a pick 6, or it gets them to the 1-yard line. They score on the next play. Now you're only up 3, 4 minutes left. Crowd's back into it. He then led such an impressive drive back down the field again, where I was really impressed with D'Amico Ryan's putting the ball back in his hands. Rookie quarterback on the road against a really good team. Like, they let him win the game. He almost lost the game, but then I was super impressed with the fact that they allowed him. The ball went back into his hands. And I feel like there's other coaches in the NFL that might want to run the ball 3 times and then punt it again and left it up to the defense. But like, Houston trusted the quarterback on the road after making a terrible decision, and he won the game. And I'm so impressed by him and, like, and Houston in general. And he's made me a big believer. And I keep going back to your point, man. If he was still at Ohio State, I mean, you're talking one of the best offenses of all time.
This type of defense, which he never had, and he would have gotten what's still Marvin Harrison Jr., still Cade Stover, that's still receiving core that he was used to throwing to.
It would have been one of the best college football teams of all time. Yeah, it's pretty wild. Number 3, the Michigan Wolverines, all the stuff before the game, College Game Day, talking about whether he's going to get a helicopter to the stadium. I mean, we got to talk about Penn State for 1 second, okay? I can't. Like, James Franklin, to me, I just can't with this guy. I can't with their team, their philosophy. It feels like he is perfectly happy losing these big games to higher ranked opponents by 10 points every single time. They would not challenge down the field. Quarterback would not throw the ball vertically to anybody but the tight end. I was thoroughly disgusted because it was almost the same game plan that they ran against Ohio State, and it didn't work then.
The exact same game plan they ran against Ohio State. I couldn't believe they really tried to just be like, hey, we're hoping that the loss of your coach makes you discombobulated and that you guys lay a goose egg. And you got to give props to what Michigan, the players themselves, were able to do. When you think about all of the noise that they had to filter out and just kind of say, okay, listen, is our coach going to be here? Are we going to get suspended? I think we had been hearing since the week before that there was going to be suspensions coming down. Something's going to happen. The NCAA is going to do this. The Big Ten's going to do this. And then it got past the weekend. And then it was on Monday, there's going to be something coming up. And it went all week long, only to find out while you're flying that your coach is suspended and he can't coach, right? You're flying to the game and you find out that he can't coach. Okay. So how do you filter out the noise of, okay, now we're going to have a different person that we've been listening to and kind of block out everything. And so I get the easiest way to do is what they're doing. And while I think I'm going to go ahead and say, and while they stole it from us, Ohio against everybody, they're going to go against Michigan against the world. Like, okay. You stole it from Ohio State to begin with, but that's a different story and a different conversation to any Michigan fans listening. But I was impressed with what they were able to do with just filtering out everything, all the distractions of Harbaugh's out. We're not going to have this. He can't give you this. He can't give this. There's no pep talk. There's nothing there. You're going into a hostile environment. And they came out and their passing game really didn't work early. And so they said, we're just going to go run the ball. They had 32 straight runs.
They did not attempt a forward pass in the second half, which is
crazy.
It's incredible. But then it's also it's such an indictment of Penn State. And it's so frustrating.
Penn State never challenged. That was terrible. Why not throw the ball deep once? Just take a shot. Like, even if it's picked off, take a shot.
You did this exact same thing against Ohio State, and you managed to hang around, but then lose. And it feels like it's the same script for them every single time. And I always say that I don't care for coaches that always seem happy to kick the ball. Like whether it's a punt or a field goal, he just always seems to want to kick the ball at the end of every possession. And I don't know. It was another one of those games where if I'm a Penn State fan or I was rooting for Penn State because I'm a fan of Oregon or Washington or a team, you want Michigan to lose, you just throw your hands up in the air. Like, are you really trying to win this game? Because it felt like they were trying to manage it and then hope that Michigan messes it up.
Yeah, that was the approach they took. Like, we're going to hope that we're not going to put our quarterback in any situation where it's on him. We're just going to hope that at some point in time, Michigan makes the mistake. And they didn't. They have really good running backs and Corum, Blake Corum. As much as, I'm a Buckeye, but Blake Corum is a really good running back and he's a good player. And I have enjoyed watching him the last 2 seasons about what he's able to do. And he didn't disappoint. They gave him a rock. He made good runs and then he popped the long run at the end. And you're sitting there like, okay, this is where you talk about you're banking on them not making a mistake. Well, they made the mistake. Like they play a gap sound defense and everyone's supposed to be where they're supposed to be. And the linebacker jumped and left the hole where he was supposed to be. And all of a sudden Now, because you're not sound on defense, now you put your offense in a situation. Now you have to throw, and he throws a terrible ball.
Yeah,
Like
that Penn State
it was
defense,
just terrible.
that Penn State defense has to be perfect.
Yeah, they have to be perfect all the time, and that's
and
really tough to do.
yeah, that's unsustainable. Number 4 on the list, Florida State. I watched quite a bit of that game against Miami. Miami hung around. Florida State, man, I don't know. I feel like Florida State is one of those teams that looks really flashy. You know, they've got the mobile quarterback, they've got the tall receivers. You know, they had that nice win earlier in the year against LSU. I feel like if they play Georgia, Alabama, an Ohio State defense, a Michigan defense, somebody's going to really punch them in the mouth. I have a feeling that offense might not be able to move the ball as consistently as it has been in the ACC. What do you think?
Yeah, I would agree. I would agree that they might have some challenges playing some of those teams that you mentioned. I think one of the things that they do have is they can be physical. They can play that physical game if need be, and they have some speed. They have some size at receiver. They have some speed at receiver. They can run the ball. It's just for them, and it's always been my question mark when you look at the Florida State teams is, are they always going to be focused mentally? Because they will play up and they will play down. And so depending on who their opponent is, they may play down and struggle like Boston College. And then, you play LSU and they look lights out. I'm like, and they play like this all season, hands down, this is going to be a team playing in the college football playoff. And so therefore they're in the position to do that. But I don't know what team you get. And so when they get to the ACC championship, that's where you'll get to see which team comes to show up. Because now you're like, look, if they lose, Washington is ready to jump in.
Yeah, they're out.
One of those one-loss teams is ready to jump them because their strength of schedule is not going to allow them to have a loss and so make it to the college football playoff.
They have to be undefeated, especially considering they're probably going to play Louisville in the ACC championship game.
And Louisville could beat them. Louisville could give them some fits.
I still don't want to talk about Louisville, Marlon. I'm still not okay with Louisville and the fact that
you still got that Louisville shock over Notre Dame.
Yeah, I'm unhappy. Everything about that game and this season. Thankfully Notre Dame was on a bye this week because I needed a little bit of a timeout from my Fighting Irish. Number 5 and number 6, remain unchanged. Washington and Oregon. Washington's got a real tough one coming up Saturday that I know we'll talk about against Oregon State, but I was expecting fireworks in that Oregon USC game, and Oregon is just such a physical, they wore USC out early. Caleb Williams looked almost defeated. They were beating him up pretty well, and it almost felt like they were trying to just take the air out of the ball a little bit so it wasn't a shootout, and Oregon was able to run on that USC defense and throw basically at will. That was a beat down.
Beat down, and I know the score was closer than what it is. I think it ended up being 36-27.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, Oregon got after. They set the tone early. They're like, we're going to be more physical than you, and that's been kind of the knock on USC the last couple of seasons is, when they play those physical teams, can they stack up? And they have not been able to do that. They're more of a finesse offense. So if you can get your hands on receivers and beat them up. Caleb, now he's made some really good plays and he's a really good quarterback and his ability to extend and throw from weird angles and make some good throws. I can understand the comparison to Mahomes, but their defense has really been what's let them down the most the last 2 seasons. And in particular this year, the defense just hasn't been able to stop anybody. And if you can't stop anybody, you make it a track meet. Now, again, we talked about Penn State trying to say we're hoping the other team doesn't make a mistake. You're pretty much saying the USC offense has to be perfect all the time.
Yes.
And that's really hard to do.
Right.
It's hard to do.
Yep, you're exactly right. The USC offense is akin to the Penn State defense. You felt like every time Caleb Williams went on the field, he had to score because the USC secondary, to me, is the worst one I've seen all year. Those guys, there was like a 90-yard touchdown. The DB got completely turned around, and then the safety absolutely whiffed. And it was a 90-yard touchdown, and the receiver never got touched. That's kind of hard to do,
That's kind of hard to have. You can't have that. And at any level, you cannot have a 90-yard touchdown where dude goes untouched.
Unbelievable. And number 5, Washington, they survived. Utah played much better this week and really gave them a test. And Utah is that team that you're going to be in a fight, like a fist fight with. And they were threatened. And they were threatened at home in the rain. Game Washington obviously needed to win, And then, they've got another tough one this week. So it's like a 3-week gauntlet for Washington here that I think is going to be really difficult, especially on the road. We're going to get to that. Number 7 is Texas. And then my dark horse, Alabama. And,
Yeah.
I don't know about their dark horse, but number 8, Alabama. They look ready. They look ready. They're in postseason form. Number 9 is Missouri, who's still not out of it. They've got kind of an outside shot here. And then, our favorite Louisville Cardinals are somehow 10th. It's just, whatever.
Hey, if you beat Notre Dame and then you just keep winning and you keep knocking guys off, all of a sudden you're like, wait a minute, this team's
if
not
they
that
end
bad.
up 12-1 and they beat Florida State, if there's some chaos, they could squeak in there.
They could squeak in there. You would need a lot of help for them to squeak in there, because I don't think you put a 1-loss Louisville team over a 1-loss Alabama team.
Of course not.
So that's kind of where you're looking at things. Or even would you consider putting the 1-loss Louisville team over a 1-loss Texas team? So those are all the things where you're kind of like, I don't know what this is going to shake out. I think Washington, Texas, Alabama, all they can do is do what they've been doing. At the name of the game of this part of the season is survive and keep advancing. That's it. Like, it doesn't matter if you win by 30. It doesn't matter if you win by 1 point. You just got to win. Like, just win and get there, and then get to your conference championships. Then you can let the chips fall where they may, and you may get a chance to get in if there's chaos. We've seen it a few times. Last year, USC lost to Utah in the Pac-12 championship. That's what allowed Ohio State to even jump and get into the discussion, because they would have been out on the outside looking in. So anything can happen once you get to those conference championships. So those teams definitely have to just stay focused. And I like Alabama's chances. Out of all those teams, I like Alabama's chances, because I think the rest of the schedule is set up nice, and they still have to play Georgia. If they knock off Georgia, now the committee will have a conversation of, because a 1-loss Georgia in the SEC championship, like, do you knock them to 4? Like, can Georgia still lose and still be 4? So that's going to be some questions you have to ask. Ohio State and Michigan take care of themselves in 10 days. So we'll have the answer to that in 10 or 11 days. So we'll know. So it's going to be fun to really watch what that happens. But I'm excited. I can't wait. I cannot wait.
Let's shift our focus here to this upcoming Saturday. And there's a couple of big games. This is always like the week before rivalry week, and this is always the SEC. Thank God this is the last year where the SEC plays 1AA schools or FCS schools the week before the big rivalries. I always hated that. Alabama will play like Chattanooga before they play
Alabama playing Chattanooga. You're right.
They always play Chattanooga. It's I understand why they do it, but man, scheduling that almost of a bye week before, in November, it's always kind of a tough look to me. I felt like, just go to a 9-game schedule with the conference expanding next year. I think they're doing away with that November game against FCS opponents, which I think is just kind of a favor for everybody. Because if you're a student, what's the incentive to go to a game like this? Like, you know what I mean? It's like, it's not going to be competitive. You'll go.
You're hoping it's like you're going to go and cheer on. You're going to do all those things.
Sure, but man,
you're going to tailgate and hang with your
friends. It's a rough look. It's a rough look going to Alabama.
I want the week next week when you're like, all right, we got a tough one next week. But yeah, it's just, that's how their schedule shakes out. They've always done it that way. It's kind of like, I'm gonna give myself a little bye. It should be over really quickly. Like, they should come out and take care of business. And if they don't, then that's going to give the committee something to kind of think about. Like, all right, wait a minute. Is this team as good as we thought they were? Or were they overlooking their opponent this week? So
there's only downside. There's only downside this week, whether it be, an injury or a sleepy first half performance. The noon games on Saturday aren't, the best. Michigan, what do you think? Trap game? Maryland?
It could be a trap game, only because Maryland has a linebacker that kind of flows. He plays pretty well. He stood out in that house again. Like, I hadn't really watched him play. So when you think about things like that, you're like, oh, wait a minute. Like, they have some guys in certain positions. And if Michigan can't pass and they become one-dimensional like they were against Penn State, then, we know that Maryland is going to spread the ball. They're going to try to take shots down the field. So the question then becomes, is if Maryland gets up, how does Michigan respond? Like, that's the question that I have. I don't think Maryland has enough really enough firepower to really do it, but anything could happen on any given Saturday. So we'll find out.
Do you want Michigan to win this game Saturday?
Absolutely. If you're Ohio State, you want Michigan
Okay.
going
Yep.
into this
Good.
game.
Good
Yeah,
man.
you
Good
want
man.
Michigan. You want Michigan undefeated so that when you get to that game, like it's for all the marbles. Like I grew up like that. That's how I see it. Any Buckeye fan will tell you, yeah, we want Michigan to be undefeated. So, win or lose, winner takes all. And so it kind of takes your ranking now because if Michigan loses again, they're going to drop. They'll still be in the top 10, but they'll be like 9. And so then it's chaos. And
Yeah.
you're just like, I don't want that. Like you
You
want
want
to be
2
able to say,
versus 3. Yeah.
I want
Just
2
go.
versus 3 for all the marbles and everything going into it. So that's what you want.
Just go beat them. I like it. The other noon games. There's an interesting Oklahoma's playing BYU at 10 in the morning out in Utah, which is kind of a tough one. Louisville plays Miami at noon.
Yeah.
Down in Miami, and that's another one where obviously Louisville has to win. Miami coming off the tough loss to their rival Florida State. I think Louisville probably survives there, but that's another tough one. And then the 2 p.m. game, I don't know if you've heard the controversy online. It's Appalachian State against James Madison, who's not ranked number 18,
Yeah.
but College Game Day decided to go to James Madison and passed up the Washington at Oregon State game. And now the Oregon State fans and the coach and the players have all felt rightfully slighted because everybody in their conference is leaving them. And now College Game Day doesn't go there for a top 10 matchup, between 2 Pac-12 schools. And the cherry on top is they go to James Madison of all places, not Alabama, not, Ohio State. They're at James Madison. So the Oregon State fans and alumni and players, like it's Oregon State versus everybody right now, even more so than Ohio versus everybody.
Know what? It's kind of you're trying to grow that fan base, and I've been watching James Madison for a while. We've had a few former Bills that went there, Dean Marlowe. You had Arthur Moats. So I've been kind of just following them just to kind of see what they do, and they were in that FCS for a while. And so when they made the jump, like it's going to be interesting to see how fast they can acclimate to this style of play. And they acclimated really quickly. They're playing really good football, and they would probably be talked about as being bowl eligible, except of the rule that you have to wait 2 years instead of the 1. So that's kind of the issue. They're not bowl eligible because they made the jump up because of a rule. So they've done the petition to see if the NCAA will waive that rule, which I think is just an absurd rule. Like if you allow them to come up and play, then why wouldn't you allow them to be able to go to a bowl game like right now? Like, that makes no sense.
That just punishes the players. It's another rule that punishes the players for no real reason. It feels very arbitrary, and they'd be in the driver's seat for a New Year's Six bowl.
Absolutely. There would be some teams that wouldn't want to play them too. I would be a little nervous playing them because you haven't really heard of some of the players, but they play hard, they play well, they make plays. And they've been down in games and they found ways to win. They have a really good culture and a really good head coach there that does some really good things. And I always get the same tweets from Dean Marlowe of, all right, let's go. And I'm just like, all right, Dean. So I've been paying attention just because of following him with his time with the Bill of watching James Madison. So,
it's impressive.
I mean, if you think about what they've been able to do,
it's really impressive. And it's a nice, cherry on top that game day is going to go there and the exposure to the program. And, they're playing another one of those kind of mid-major darlings in App State and, that famous upset, however many years ago now.
I love that
of Michigan.
I love it. I'm like, yeah.
I'm sure you did. 3:30 is the SEC game of the day. It's the only game between 2 SEC teams. Georgia is going to Tennessee. Boy, Tennessee laid an egg last week.
Yes,
I watched quite a bit of that. It's the first time under Josh Heupel that they scored less than 10 points in a game, and Joe Milton looked lost. Like he looked terrible in that game, and it's surprising because the one thing you always bank on from Tennessee is pace, tempo, and offensive efficiency, and you didn't get any of it. It was weird game.
Sometimes you lay those goose eggs sometimes, and you just got to go back and say, okay, now what did they do to get us off rhythm? Was it something they did defensively to stymie our offense, or was it us? Did we overthink it? Did we try too many things? Because when you go into a game thinking like we should win and we should score this many points and you don't, you have to go back and question your own preparation. And so I think Tennessee will definitely really, they need to score points. So this is the week they have to kind of figure it out. They can't lay a goose egg this week or else it's going to get ugly really fast. But, this is one of those games where Hey, look, if you figure it out, like you can definitely challenge Georgia. Georgia historically has started slow in some games, so you're trying to figure out which team is going to show up. If you can get up early on them, you might make them question themselves and kind of like, all right, was last week a fluke? And so that's going to put the pressure on them. It's in Tennessee, so it's going to be fun. Like I hope Tennessee comes in. I like to just see those close games. I
Yeah,
don't
of
know how
course.
close this game is, but if Tennessee's offense shows up, it could be a close game,
They've got a good
and we could be
quarterback.
sitting there cheering. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And Joe Milton is a live dog. I feel like in any game that he plays, that
Yep.
he could have one of those games. As going back to like the the 90s, the Peyton Manning era, T. Martin, the Tennessee Florida games. Neyland Stadium always struck me as one of the toughest places in America to play back then.
Yeah.
The song and the colors and the orange and white checkerboard end zones, and like Tennessee was like a top 5 like road stadium in college football back then.
Absolutely.
I
Yeah.
don't think it is anymore. If they can knock off the number 1 team, hopefully they have a set of goalposts ready to go, because famously they
Absolutely. They're
took
definitely
it
going to
down to the
storm
river
us there.
last year, beating Alabama. So they knocked off Alabama. So there's no reason that they couldn't knock off Georgia here. And boy, that would throw things into
Chaos.
chaos
We
real
love
quick.
chaos, right? I
Yeah,
would love to see that chaos. So it's going to be interesting. I think there's going to be some things that need to go Tennessee's way, right? Like offensively, you have to start fast, and you need Georgia to start slow. You're going to need some turnovers, obviously stymie them. Like you kind of have to make them one dimensional. So you're going to have to be strong against the run, play action wise, because their tight end is a mismatch on the linebackers. Like Bowers is going to be able to eat the linebackers, eating or safeties up. So you've either got to really get a good pass rush there. But if you can get some turnovers early and score, that's the thing about the upset mentality is you can't be content. Like when we talked about that a couple weeks ago when Ohio State struggled the first half and they were down 9-7 and the defense came through and held on the field goals. If you're going to beat Georgia and you get turnovers, you have to score 7. Like you
you
can't
can't
kick
be.
field goals. You can't trade field goals. You have to go in and like we've got to every time you get the ball, 7, 7, because it
Yep.
puts the pressure back on Georgia. So I don't know if Tennessee can do that, especially where their offense played last week. But we'll see. Fingers crossed, because I just want to see a challenging game and really, I want to see a shootout. I want to see it come
You
down
can't.
to the
You
last
can't.
drive.
Yep, you can't coach like James Franklin. And
No,
then B, if Georgia does lose, that sets up 1 versus 2 next week, Michigan, Ohio
absolutely,
State.
because Ohio State
Which,
and they got to take care of business this
of
week too.
course,
So
and we're getting there.
yeah,
We're getting there. So the other the 3:30 game that I'm gonna unfortunately
I'll
have
be
on.
watching. I'll be watching Wake
Oh,
Notre
of
Dame.
course.
Yeah, I'll be watching
Yeah,
that game
Notre
too.
Dame, Wake Forest. It is the end of Sam Hartman as Notre Dame quarterback at home. Hopefully, inside baseball here. Hopefully, it's the end of Jack Collinsworth being the play-by-play guy for Notre Dame on NBC. I am not a fan. I haven't been a fan since they started this. I miss Mike Tirico. I know we're not getting Mike Tirico back, but
Nope, you're not.
honestly, the Jack Collinsworth, Jason Garrett era of Notre Dame football, it needs to go. I can't. They're so flat.
So, so you're saying they're not inspiring? Is that what you're saying? Like you're
There,
saying?
that is one word for it. Man, it's time. So hopefully this is the last Notre Dame home game of the year. So their last game on NBC, and I can't wait for there to be a change in the broadcast booth next year. 4:00 is obviously your Buckeyes playing at
Yes.
home against Minnesota. Any worry here?
Honestly, you shouldn't have too much of worry. I mean, they are 5-5. They're going to come out. They're going to try to run the ball. I mean, that's what they do. I think defensively we match up well. Again, it's the same thing. Start fast so you can get your guys off the field and get them out in the second. Get some young guys some reps that you need, just in case you have to plug somebody in. Uh, and the main thing is just to stay healthy. If they take the same blueprint that they did last week and they run the ball well and they get the ball, and then Marvin Harrison Jr. has 3 touchdowns, then yeah, I think they win it. But I think this is a game they win. You just have to be sound. I think you have to just say, we're going to come in and not worry about what happens next week. The following game, you have to worry about what happens this week. So main thing is O-line, D-line, everybody gets healthy. If there's anybody that's banged up, I'm sitting them out. Like, hey, you know what? We think we can get through this game without you. So any receivers that's got a little nagging injury, you're sitting out. I need you next week. I need all hands on deck for the following week. So, you're going to make sure you try to get all your running backs healthy. You maybe put Travion on a pitch count and kind of say, look, 20 touches. That's it. That's all I'm giving you. and anything more than that, we're going to let some of the other guys have the ball. Now, if you're in a dogfight and you're just not playing well, then yeah, the pitch count goes out the window and you're running to get the win because you still need to be undefeated going into that game the following week, and you're hoping that Michigan takes care of business as well at noon.
Yeah, I mean, Michigan, you whacked them 52-10 on October 7th. They beat
Yeah,
Minnesota. So it feels like anytime Minnesota stepped up in caliber, they played UNC earlier this year and they lost 31-13. So, they can be competitive with, Northwestern, and they beat
right.
Iowa 12-10 in a game hopefully nobody watched. And they lose to Illinois by 7, and Purdue beat them by 19 last week. So clearly, talent wise, this is not competitive. And
Yeah,
Ohio State, if it should feel like last week in a way. I mean, Minnesota is probably a touch better than the Michigan State program is right now, but this
yeah, I
should
think
not be
so.
competitive. Shouldn't be competitive into the second half, and I think it'd be a disappointment if it is. And clearly, you just want to be healthy, get everybody off that field at 7:15 on Saturday, and turn the
Absolutely.
page. And
Turn
here
the
we go.
page and go back to the clock, and you know what's going down. That clock has been counted down since last year's game. So that's where you kind of like now your focus goes on that. You have all the traditions of going through the week. You get your senior tackle. You do all those things that you normally would do tradition leading up to that week, but your focus is now on Minnesota. You have to really worry about Minnesota this week, and then you could turn the page to that team up north, and you won't hear me say anything within them starting Saturday.
Fair enough. So I wanted to ask you a couple things. So this is Ohio State's last home game.
Yes.
What do you remember about your last home game in college?
It was my last home game in college. We actually played Michigan.
Okay. Yep.
So it was. I remember it being an abnormally warm day for it being in the middle of November. I want to say it was like about 56, 55 degrees. Sun came out, and we just wanted to really kind of make sure we played well. It was our last chance at playing Michigan, and we didn't win in 2029. Gave Coach Cooper his first victory against that team up north, but really it was just a lot. It was a long season. It was an up and down season for a lot of us. We had expectations going into what we thought the season would look like, and it didn't end up materializing the way we thought it was going to look. That ugly loss against Penn State. We had a loss against Illinois. It was just one of those just weird seasons where it was just we didn't live up to the expectations that we had of ourselves, and it was good to kind of. It was a lot of talk of if we lose this game, would they get rid of Coach Cooper? Michigan had one of their players that kind of was talking in the media and said they want to come up here and beat our blankety blank blank blank, and they want to get
Mm-hmm.
our coach fired. And so now he's
Wow.
like, that's our goal. We want to get their coach fired. And I was like, oh, okay. So we really had a big chip on our shoulder to kind of like, okay, we've got to come in, we've got to play well. And it didn't go. It wasn't pretty the entire game, but we definitely held them. We got some turnovers. We ended up keeping them out, pretty much doing what we needed to do. And then I ended up getting a blocked field goal that game as well. I think Luke Fickell, head coach at Wisconsin, ended up getting an interception that game. So I remember some of the key points of that game. And we were able to really kind of turn the tide that game, really just put it all together. And Joey had some catches. Bible Hoon was a quarterback. Like just kind of getting that first W against Michigan when it was kind of we were on the other side of kind of how that Michigan team felt, kind
It's a
of with
nice way to.
they just kept winning and winning and winning. You're like, and you're trying so hard. You're like, we can't figure this out. Like, why? We were on that side of it, just trying to like getting close. Like we had some ties. I had a tie my sophomore year, and then you're just like, we're close. Is this? And then they always ended up making one extra play, or I think a couple years later you had Tim Biakabatuka that ran for 300 and something yards
Mhm.
against us like one year. So it's just always just something you didn't anticipate. But definitely once you got different coaches that kind of understood the rivalry, understood how to prepare better, they had definitely better success under Tressel and under Urban Meyer. So, it's interesting to see. But yeah, that was my last game, and I was glad we ended up getting our last home game,
That's a
a victory
nice.
against
That's
Michigan.
that's a perfect way to end even a disappointing season. I mean, obviously knocking
Yes.
off your rival. Did you play a bowl game?
Yeah, we played a bowl game. We ended up losing to Georgia on the last minute of the game. We were up, we took the
Okay.
lead, and they threw a pass. We went all out blitz, kind of like what happened on
Yeah.
Monday. On
Oh,
Monday,
yikes.
all out
Okay.
blitz,
Oh, God.
and running back flared Sherwin Williams from Alabama. If you remember that name back in the day,
Yeah. Yep.
ended up getting drafted by the Dallas Cowboys. Sherwin Williams was a good running back for them, and we had an all out blitz. So we were all playing inside technique. running back flared and quarterback. So when he flared, it was the defensive end supposed to peel to get to him. And when you're leaving a defensive end in a foot
Yeah.
race with a
Good luck.
4-4 running back, that's a mismatch. And the quarterback was able to get the ball over the defensive end's hand. Sherwin Williams caught it, and there's nobody there. It's a foot race, and so by the time you turn, because they're all running go routes, and by the time you turn and look, like he's running down the middle of the field, safety's out, like everybody's in coverage, and he ran to the end zone untouched, and they ended up winning the game because of that. So that was a tough loss.
But the Michigan game was clearly the biggest game of the season.
Biggest game of the season. That was a game we wanted to win. We had one last shot from our class to really try to get that victory, and Coach Cooper hadn't won a game yet. Like he hadn't won a game.
Do they do senior day tradition? Like, will they announce
we did our
seniors?
We did our senior day traditions. We did all those things. And then we had like senior tackle. You do a lot of things. You have some talking. You always have a former player come back and talk about what it's like to play in that game. So we had some traditions back then that we went through. And so we did all that during the week. And then you're just kind of trying to make sure mentally you're ready to go and understand the scheme, what you want to do for the week. And you're like, look, this is it. Like you're going through your head, like, this is it. This is the last Ohio State Michigan game that I want to play in. And so I want to make sure I go out and play as the best way I can, and we ended up finally getting that victory, getting us off the snide. And we were one of two teams that Coach Cooper was at the helm at that beat Michigan. I think he was 2-10 or 2-11-1 or something. Yeah. So he didn't have that success against Michigan, but we were the first team to help him get that victory.
Okay.
So, and I
got
next week
for that. Next week, I look forward to talking to you about all the traditions of the Ohio State Michigan week. Like I really want to get into, what you remember, maybe how it's different today than it was back when you played, or even way back, before you played, and like all the different traditions, why they're done, how they're done, and
Absolutely.
kind of your emotions, going into it. And maybe we can rustle up somebody from the Michigan side of things for a few minutes, maybe to balance things out. Well, but maybe we'll talk about that We'll talk about that when we're not recording anymore. But I'm so looking forward to that, and fingers crossed that both teams win this weekend, because that will be the game of the weekend. Clearly, maybe the game of the year, with the Alabama-Georgia SEC championship game looming the week after. The last game, we've talked about it a little bit on Saturday, the 7:30 primetime game, Washington and Oregon State. I'm going to pick the upset here. This is one of those, I'm gonna, Washington's been playing with fire, and they've been kind of, they pulled out the Oregon game. They pulled out the game against Utah. They escaped against Arizona State on a pick six late. This is another road game. This is the world for Oregon State. Like, they're pissed off. Game day's not there. They're pissed. They won some lawsuit yesterday where they and Washington State are the only two voting members of the Pac-12 anymore. Like, that place is going to be wild. And
it's going to be wild. Yes,
it is going to be wild, and it's kind of a tough place to play in Corvallis. And I feel like Washington's been walking the tightrope for a while now. And after playing Utah, which just will beat you up, I'm picking the upset here. I think Oregon State wins this game and rushes the field, and tells the Pac-12 to shove it.
So you're saying they're going to be like this?
Yeah,
Take a finger back. Okay.
Yep.
We'll see. You know what? I've been impressed. It hasn't always looked pretty, but I've really been impressed with Washington's being able to be resilient. They've just, even when it looks bad and it looks like, oh my gosh, they're about to get run off the field, they find a way to overcome. And I think that's the question you have to ask, right? Like, to your point, all right, Oregon State, you're taking the upset. I'll go ahead and take the other side. I'll take Washington. What I do think is going to happen is Oregon State does get up. I think Oregon State gets up, and they may even get up by double digits. But I think Penix and company will find a way to overcome, and I think they will make a play late in the game, kind of like they did against Oregon, and they'll find a way to win the game late. So that's my prediction. Okay. I would say it's going to be maybe a 35-33 type of game. I think they'll score. I do like Oregon State. I think they can score some points, but I'm going to take Washington.
The
DJ.
transfer from Clemson is their quarterback, so he's clearly used to being in big games.
Yes.
Famously he lost at Notre Dame when Clemson was number one. He came in for Trevor Lawrence, and frankly, he played fantastic that game. He had like 400 yards passing, but Clemson couldn't stop Notre Dame. That wouldn't happen this year. But Oregon, funny enough, Marlon, Oregon's a 2.5-point favorite. Oregon State's a 2.5-point favorite. I just looked it up. So, obviously Vegas is kind of thinking the same way I am, that this is
Vegas. I mean, it's a tough game for them. It is going to be tough, but I think if they can figure out how to overcome, so I'm gonna go ahead and take Washington. We'll see. I won't say let's put a wager on it because but we'll see.
No, it's a coin flip. It feels like a coin flip game, and I'm really looking forward to it because I love, like you do, the close games with stakes that mean something. And I also I love the overarching story of the team whose conference left them and College Game Day won't go there. And their coach has worn some, Oregon State, nobody wants us shirts. And man, if there's ever a game where you can get the players to buy in of no respect.
This is a game.
This is it.
This is a no respect. They should all walk around with Rodney Dangerfield on their shirts, like no respect.
Yeah, the conference literally left you. So this isn't manufactured. This isn't, Michigan against everybody or Ohio against everybody. Like, this is true disrespect of Oregon State. And if I'm a player or I'm a fan or I'm a coach, like, everything points to this game. The only other one that's relevant for the college football playoff, Texas.
That's my upset. I'm going upset. I'm taking Iowa State 5-2. They're going to play Texas tough. So I think Texas better be aware of the upset for that game. And I'm gonna go ahead and say Iowa State is going to go ahead and do it. I know Texas is favored, but this is one of those games where you're kind of like, I don't know. Like, I think Iowa State they're at home, and they're going to be able to. Let's see what they do. I'm going to take the upset. That's
probably gonna be a little chilly. It's a night game. In Ames, probably a little chilly. It's only 7.5-point spread, so it's clearly, it's basically a 2-to-1 dog. So you're right in there. I look forward to watching all those Saturday. It kind of ramps up as the day goes on. The noon games are a little bit tough, and then 3:30, 4 o'clock for your Buckeyes, and then 7:30 and 8 o'clock. And I can't wait. Hopefully both teams win. I can't wait to talk to you next week about what's coming the week after. I can't wait. I genuinely, I don't know a lot of the Ohio State Michigan traditions, and hopefully our audience will appreciate your perspective. Clearly, you're not going to be neutral next week, and that's okay. You get a free pass.
Never neutral. Never
neutral. And thanks everybody for tuning in. Please like and subscribe to the Cover One, page and the Cover One college football page. Hopefully, Marlon, things around here can maybe take a turn for the upside before Thanksgiving, because football's a little rough. It's been, and I told you before we started recording, the two teams I follow the most closely and the two teams I do a podcast about, one has lost the game on the last play of the game with 10 men on the field, and one has lost the game with 12 men on the field. It's a tough season. It's a tough way to go.
Tough season. Yeah, that's a tough way to go. But hopefully, the sun will come out tomorrow, and better days are ahead of us. And hopefully, I'll be saying the same thing in 10 days. Like, let's go. But whoever wins that game, it doesn't matter. It's just I want it for all the marbles. So good luck to both teams, Ohio State and Michigan. I will be a Michigan fan this week. I'll be rooting for Michigan because I want them undefeated. Both teams undefeated going into that game. So good luck to all my guys up. Well, I don't know anybody. I know a couple guys up there. So good luck to some of those guys up there in Ann Arbor. And let's go Buckeyes.
All right. We'll see you next week.